Hello and welcome to today's webcast brought to you by Compliance Week and CERTA. I'm Kyle Brasser with Compliance Week and I'll be your host. Today's webcast is Implications and Predictions, the rapid expansion of global forced labor regulations. Before we hear from our presenter, let me review the agenda. We're scheduled to go for 1 hour. After the presentation, we will have a question and answer session. Your questions will be kept confidential and anonymous, so please don't be shy. You can ask your questions at any time using the Ask a Question function on the left-hand side of your screen, and I'll pose them to our guest at the end of his presentation. After the Q&A, I'll wrap up the webcast. This webcast will also offer CPE credit for all attendees. Please use Google Chrome or Firefox as your internet browser and disable your pop-up blockers to ensure access to the exam. Once I have signed off and the webcast is completely over, the final examination will be presented automatically in a separate window. If you have trouble viewing the CPE test or receiving the CPE certificate, please send an email to webcasts@complianceweek.com. Once again, to ensure receipt of your CPE credit, please use Google Chrome or Firefox as your internet browser. If you've missed anything, I'll repeat these instructions at the end of the webcast, so stay tuned. A few other administrative details. At any time during the presentation, listeners can download the slides from the drop-down menu on the left-hand side of your screen. There, you will also find the feedback form for the webcast. We welcome your thoughts as we are always looking to improve your experience. If you wish to increase the slide size, you can hit the View Slide Full Screen button at the top right of your screen. And lastly, a Help button is located in the upper right-hand corner of your screen for assistance. I'd like to welcome today's speaker. It is my pleasure to introduce Jag Lamba. Jag is the founder and CEO of CERTA. He grew up in Bombay, India, and studied computer science before kicking off his career as a software engineer. After moving to the US and transitioning into product management, Jag began pursuing his MBA from Wharton while working at McKinsey, eventually moved into strategy consulting practice. Jag founded CERTA in 2016 with the help from Techstars and Angels. It's great to have you all with us today. And with that, I will turn things over to Jag to get us started.
Thanks, Kyle. It's great to be here on this important topic. So I'm going to quickly walk through a few slides. Kyle, is this the time for me to walk through my slides? Right?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So I'm just, moving through the slides. So can you see this example of Uniqlo?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. So I wanted to start with a very simple example. And this is something that, folks on the call might be familiar with. But this was so unexpected with, huge implications for a widely loved brand, right? So what you might know is that Uniqlo had a shipment of, sort of 7 stocks that were on its way to the US, right? Out of the 7, one of them, they couldn't prove that it, wasn't made in a restricted region of China, the Xinjiang province, right? Where a lot of cotton comes from. And Uniqlo failed to address and show transparency end-to-end for 1 out of the 7 sort of styles or, sort of pieces of stocks. So what happened? Basically, the Customs and Border Protection Agency seized those stocks. And Uniqlo was given 60 days to remove these goods from US, the whole thing, the whole shipment, right? And, while this would have led to some supply chain disruptions, I think the bigger risk was the reputational risk, as you probably can see on the right here. This was widely published at multiple blogs and, including newspapers like the New York Times. And, trust is a very valuable thing, right? And suddenly a much beloved brand like Uniqlo got a lot of negative attention. So the impact of this is not just regulatory. The impact of this is much beyond that, right? It's basically around making sure that we are, that we're basically being seen as stewards of values. One of my clients has a really great saying. Every time you choose a supplier, you choose the world that you want to build. And that's the power that most of the companies that do business in, the US and Europe have, right? And just on a personal note, that's what attracted me to this domain in the first place. The ability to spread the goodness of the firms that I admire to the rest of the world, right? So one of my favorite topics. Now, in terms of regulation, just moving on to slide 2, the regulation on this is growing incredibly fast. And like all regulation, it depends on the jurisdiction, So most countries, most modern sort of, Western countries are adopting this regulation. And it is, it's akin to sort of the new privacy regulations, right? This is, I think a lot of the folks on the phone might be familiar with the UFLPA in North America. I mean, of course, in Canada, the Canadian Transparency Supply Chain Law. The German supply chain law is pretty far-reaching. The Norwegian supply chain law is actively being enforced. So it's what we expect is that every jurisdiction will have some flavor of this law. And I think most jurisdictions already do. So this is not something that we can wait on. The other sort of message here is that most of these, I think, I would say all of these are actively being enforced. So again, the best time to do this was, start working on this was 2 years ago. The next best time is today. Okay? So action is required. Now, why is this important, and why is this suddenly so important? So most of the countries are signatories to the UN SDG, right? Which basically aims to eradicate forced labor by 2030. Now, most of the forced labor, for us is, from our suppliers, right? From companies on this call. And most companies, at least that I work with, that my firm works with, have tens of thousands of suppliers. And they, in turn, have tens, sometimes hundreds of thousands of tier 2 suppliers. So how do we, I mean, it's a massive problem, right? And, I think it's a real problem. And by that, I mean, just the sheer number of people still living in forced labor. I mean, for me, when I saw this number, it was shocking. 30 million people, it's absolutely shocking. And grown since 2016. I mean, how's that possible in today's world, right? So it was completely shocking to me, and obviously, I feel like, we have to act. And I feel very privileged that, we are in this industry where we can actually make a difference, right? So, just the sheer billions of dollars generated by, forced labor, the percentage of forced labor that are children, like 12 million. And most of this is concentrated in, Asia Pac. But I think the attention is moving to other regions as well, because, even though that, seems like the hotbed of forced labor activity, what you'll see later in the presentation is that there are other regions that have significant forced labor risk, right? So it's a massive global problem. And, the United Nations, with the help of all the signatories of, the UN SDGs, are making a difference. And I personally am super glad that, that this is happening. So this is fairly wide-ranging. So, for example, here's some examples of which companies these laws apply to. The main message is that you don't need to be headquartered in the region to have to conform to the law of that land. So, for example, in Canada, if you have greater than 250 employees, and X sort of 20 million in assets or 40 million in revenue, you don't need to be headquartered in Canada. but the law applies to you, right? The German supply chain law, you used to be 3,000 employees in Germany. Now it's 1,000 employees in Germany, right? The reason why Norwegian Supply Chain Act is becoming such a big deal for our clients is basically 50 employees. I mean, so I think my main message for this slide is that you need to worry about global regulations, not just the regulations of the country that you're headquartered in. Even though most of these regulations are fairly similar, there are nuances that are different across each region, and the regulators are going to expect that your firm is implementing all those nuances. Right? Happy to answer more questions around this. And the risks and penalties, like we saw in the Uniqlo example, are real. And this is just the beginning, right? We've seen how the risks and penalties increase over the years for, similar regulations, like, for example, the anti-corruption, anti-bribery regulation, where some of these fines are in the billions of dollars. Department of Justice will set up monitors in the company, et cetera. So this, even though it's, we know how these regulations go, right? They will become, they're already pretty significant. They will become even more significant, right? So here are some examples in terms of the amount of almost $3 billion of goods seized on the UFLPA. The German Supply Chain Act, it's $400 million or 2% of, annual revenue. It's fairly significant. And, in terms of civil liability, I was recently speaking with a large global healthcare firm where unfortunately the head of procurement went to jail. And this is not for this act, but I'm saying the implications of non-compliance are serious, very significant, right? And then just to sort of, what happened with that firm is that compliance then took over all third-party management, and then the business slowed down. So now they're sort of untangling that, sort of using technology, figuring out the right balance between compliance and procurement. But what I'm trying to say is that the impact on that firm lasted over 10 years. So it's serious, right? Of course, reputational risk, it not only applies to folks that sell to retail customers, but it also applies to B2B businesses. I mean, I can't even imagine, we enable, of course, companies, our software enables companies to do, adverse media checks before they work with any supplier. And I can't even imagine the impact of, some regulatory fine or infraction, appearing and having to justify that for every new client, right? It's going to be a nightmare. So the reputational risk will lead to significant impact on revenue and potential profitability, right? The operational risk we knew about, we talked about, how Uniqlo, completely lost, all 7 shipments and, had to scramble and figure out how to overcome that.
Hey, Jag, real quick, Kyle here, just jumping in. I wanted to talk a little bit and ask you a little bit more on reputational risk.
Yeah.
So, recent example, we saw earlier this week the DOL penalized Tough Torque for child labor violations, and in that press release where they announced the penalty, they made it a point to list the major companies that Tough Torque is a supplier to: John Deere, Yamaha, Toro, all these household names. So that, I think, it's an interesting aspect to consider too. Is it's not just the reputational risk of your company, but the major companies that you work with, and then that jeopardizes your relation with them as well. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, Kyle, I don't know anything that would get the company's board's attention more than my clients telling me that, hey, I am in that press release, in a negative press release, because of you. which is like impact, of course, not only to my reputation, but like real near-term revenues, right? I mean, I'm sure clients will, will need some explanation for that. And, the amount of, there are people who are going to get fired in that case, right? There's no, just for the company to make an example that this is important. There is going to be a near-term revenue impact because, clients are going to be a little bit more careful about spending more money with you. There's obviously regulatory impact and the distraction of the board and the management to deal with something like this. So, even though we bucket all of that under reputational risk, there are so many layers to that. And, just like I was talking about the example, Kyle, with the healthcare firm, some of the downstream impact, because, companies tend to overreact when something like this happens, some of the downstream impact to growth can last 10 plus years. So this becomes a part of the organization's story. It's a massive, massive blip. So yeah, I mean, I think there's so much under reputational risk, Kyle, that's where I worry the most. Like even as a business owner, the CEO of a company, I mean, that's the part that I would be most concerned about.
Yeah, and I think there's another aspect of this that's really interesting too. This particular case, and you can call it recency bias. It just happened Monday, so that's why it's so fresh on the top of my head.
Yeah.
So, in Tough Torque, when they're sort of addressing the allegations and everything like that, their defense was that the issue sort of arose from a staffing agency that they contacted, and some of the issues that staffing agency where they were not properly vetting these individuals who were misrepresenting information about themselves. So now we're talking about that nth party risk. My supplier and then the staffing agency that they're engaging with, and that's the core issue here a lot of the times. It's not just your third parties, but it's your third parties, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. And, the regulators have made it clear time and again, you can outsource work, but you cannot outsource this responsibility for regulation, right? The compliance risk, etc. It's on you. So the regulators have been very consistent, and it is impossible and irresponsible for firms now to claim ignorance, because now, the regulation is very clear, but also there is technology, tools, and processes available and being used by best-in-class firms that have shown that this is, commercially viable activity. This is not, something that is so onerous that companies cannot do. And we'll talk about at the end, Kyle, certain ways that companies use to mitigate the tier N risk, the N tier risk, which is like a tier 2, tier 3 risk. But it is something that, clearly there's no way companies can say, I didn't know that, or claim ignorance, or, it's too far from my business. That excuse clearly with your example does not work. Yeah. I mean, and, just drawing the link, Kyle, right, all the way from a tier 3 supplier, impacting John Deere. Right. So John Deere's perspective is, it's like, all the way, so it's, supply chain transparency, this is, again, I think like Warren Buffett says that really well, right? It takes 30 years to build a reputation and one incident to destroy it.
Yeah, thank you.
So what are the ways that companies can mitigate forced labor risk, right? So one is, just to build on what Kyle said, supply chain mapping, which is, we have to cover, companies have to map the nth tier of supply chain. At least, at a minimum, there's no excuse for not going to tier 2 vendors for your tier 1 vendors, for your critical vendors, right? So your most important, like 20% of your most important vendors, you have to go to tier 2 for them. And then ideally, you want to go to tier 3 again for their most critical vendors, right? The due diligence has to be risk-based. I mean, this is nothing new. That's the only way to make it commercially viable. And that's the only way to make it such that you're capturing the signals from the noise, right? So you have to focus on the highest risk due diligence, which typically means a weighted sort of average of your risks, right? As you get risk scores. I mean, some of this will be binary, but some of it will be weighted average, right? I think the other thing that's important in risk-based due diligence is that many of these will be non-obvious. So some of our clients, just to come back to the Xinjiang province, for some of our clients, even though the vendors will not be based in Xinjiang, they will do a owner check and find that one of the UBOs, the ultimate beneficial owners, might come out based in Xinjiang, right? Or might have an office in Xinjiang, not even headquartered. So because this level of due diligence is totally possible now, and not easily, but it is doable. I think that's becoming the standard for best-in-class firms. Audit-ready documentation, right? No matter what you do, unless you have a detailed audit trail of all your activities, it won't mean anything to the regulators. Like your process doesn't mean anything to regulators without a complete audit trail. And the only way to maintain a complete audit trail is to automate the complete audit trail, right? So I'll get to a little bit more on that, but the automation of the end-to-end process, the digitization of the end-to-end process is the only way I have found to maintain pristine audit trails, right? Both for your internal auditors and external auditors. Right? Contract compliance, that's a must-have. That serves as a pretty high barrier for vendors to actively or be negligent of things that you put in the contract. In terms of compliance as a culture, this applies to both your own employees. It always starts with your own employees, but then there are various things that you can do to embed that culture in your main key suppliers as well. So some of the activities that come to mind, of course, are code of conduct, ensuring that the regular trainings, of course, video trainings delivered to suppliers around compliance, and maybe the reinforcement of the message from your buyers for your suppliers, right? Just in terms of compliance and being vigilant of any laxness in compliance with suppliers. Of course, swift remediation. This has multiple layers in swift remediation. So best-in-class companies, what we're seeing is as soon as they find a red flag, maybe not an amber flag, but a red flag, they will stop payments. So their compliance system is integrated with their payment systems, like typically in SAP or something. So the red flag immediately puts a hold on all future payments. And then, of course, until the red flag is removed, the payment hold is not removed. So that's what I'm seeing in terms of best in class. Of course, the same thing can be accomplished with processes, but that leaves you open to manual errors and things slipping through the cracks, etc. But regulators love this automated stop payments, right? It kind of shows that you're really serious about it. This is no longer absolutely not just an onboarding only due diligence. This must be a continuous monitoring. And the regulators are pretty clear about it. The auditors, the internal auditors are very clear about it. And generally, practically, the business world evolves so quickly now that it just has to be. The suppliers are changing, owners are changing. So supply chains are so dynamic that there's no, there's no way companies can live with just doing, due diligence during monitoring. And the only way I know to make this possible is by digitizing as much as possible for visibility, for risks, for compliance, for audit trails, the whole thing. And happy to, of course, go deep into it because this is what we help clients with. So happy to answer any more detailed questions and share some client stories. Kyle, any comments here before we move on?
Yeah, we had one question from the audience, actually, Jag. We had an individual who asked, we have less than 250 employees at our subsidiary in Canada, but we have assets over 20 million Canadian dollars and over 40 million Canadian dollars. We don't have to file a financial report, though. Are we in scope for the Canadian Forced Labor Act? And I've actually been talking with one of your employees there, Zenis, and he's shared some of his perspectives on it. He said another criteria would be if you're listed on the stock exchange in Canada, that's an aspect there. But there are certain thresholds that have been met here. But I think it goes back to that point that you were talking about at the beginning. You have to look beyond just, okay, I'm in the U.S., I got to follow the U.S. laws and look at these things and kind of bring the data from your company and check it against that. So do you mind just maybe fielding this specific thing, but then kind of reiterating those points a little?
Yeah, I think from some of this, of course, will be determined by enforcement actions. But if you meet even one of those criteria, it would. I think it would be important to put controls around that regulation. It's just, some of this is loosely defined by definition because it wants to give regulators and enforcers, the power to use some judgment. So unless you meet none of the criteria, that's the only way I would say, okay, well, I don't need to worry about that region. And the additional effort beyond what you would implement for UFLPA anyway, to implement controls around the Canadian Supply Chain Transparency Act, or the German or the Norwegian, it's incremental effort beyond it. So I think once you put the framework in place for one of these, for one country, applying it to multiple countries, we found that to be not the huge lift. So just the way I would sequence is, of course, UFLPA, must do now. And then in phase 2, look at your second, if you will, largest countries where you have a significant presence. It could be Canada, it could be Europe, and then, tackle it in a phased manner.
Great, and I'll follow up quick with another question we just got here, Jag. This is another scope question. So regarding the German Supply Chain Act, it now like you said, it now applies to 1,000 plus employees as of January 1st, 2024. So we had someone who asked, are reports required to be published in 2024 to cover the 2023 year, or as of 2025 to cover the 2024 year?
My understanding is that the reports required as of 2025, but I am more of a technologist and my legal opinion doesn't matter that much, right? So I can't offer legal opinion on this. So this is things that your compliance team, like legal teams, external legal teams, they would know, much better. But my understanding, I can just share.
Great, thanks, Jack. We'll turn it back to you in your presentation.
Great. So I think we wanted to go beyond the conceptual, theoretical way, I guess means to comply. And I think give you some more practical, tangible examples of how companies comply with these laws also, right? So just switching to, so this is, this is where companies, as they are working with new suppliers, and this is, it's not just on onboarding again, companies will do at least an annual recertification. So annually ask the companies to recertify that their answers are correct. But this is where companies ask for, not just the data on the supplier, but the critical suppliers of their suppliers, right? So that's critical. So you're going to at least tier 2, and that, I think keeping tier 2s and tier 3s for critical suppliers is what I found to be the gold standard currently. It's too much to do for all suppliers, but critical suppliers, you must do that, right? The next thing is, of course, once you gather information about tier 2s and tier 3s, it's not sufficient to only screen tier 1s, but we will need to screen tier 2s as well, right? So and in addition to that, you can't rely on just the data provided by your tier 1 suppliers. There are ways by which multiple data sources, or looking at the bill of landing and shipping data, office locations in the bills, to ensure that your tier 1s or tier 2s aren't trying to hide something, right? Because if a bill shows up, coming from a restricted region, that would be devastating, no matter how much due diligence you've done, right? So at a minimum, you need to capture the tier 2 data and also do reasonable checks to ensure that all the addresses that are either come up from third-party data sources like Sayari and DNB and others, or in bills, are also covered, right? We need the UFLPA questionnaires, which is actual certification. We need to send those questionnaires to both your tier 1 and tier 2 at least suppliers, and risk rank the answers, right? So and based on the risk, you can then do additional due diligence. This could lead to red flags, amber flags, further escalations, etc. Again, this is fairly standard. Need to basically screen all the names, right? UBOs, tier 2s, by UBOs I mean ultimate beneficial owners, tier 2s, and not just limited to your third parties, right? Your immediate suppliers. Kyle, just again reiterating your example that you had given, right? Again, this is really important to have a system where you can not only take action on the red flags, so do all the escalation, the approvals, the whole flow. And the reason why this is so important is because then you have a complete audit trail, of, okay, here's the data that we gathered, all the case data that we gathered for this particular supplier. These are the screening results that we received. This was the red flags. We investigated them. They seemed real. We sent it, escalated it for further review by our legal team. And all this data, you need to have an audit trail. And a consolidated system can actually create automatically that audit trail for you as the system is, automating things, right? So I think you should expect that from your system. And finally, all the remediation, ideally you want to also capture in the audit trail, right? The reasons for why something was a false positive or wasn't material. You need those reasons either provided by analysts or by the escalation layer. They need to be captured in your system. Right? So these are just examples of how we're seeing best-in-class companies cover this. Obviously, happy to discuss this more, but this 6-step process is, available today, possible today. It's available from Certa. but it's also, I mean, you can do a market scan. This is possible now, and I think companies are required to do this. So happy to answer any questions about the technology implementation of how companies are doing it. I just want to go back to trends, right? So generally the business climate was completely changed and reshaped with GDPR. And we're seeing the same thing happen with sort of this sort of labor rights and forced labor regulations. And you might know all the efforts. So California had its own privacy law. Mexico has its own privacy law. Of course, Europe started with GDPR. So the same thing is happening, right? So I think there's no question in my mind that this is going to continue, and the enforcement is going to get stricter, right? So it's going to be more countries, or every single country enacting some regulation, and then more and more countries sort of being strict about enforcement as they, as things become clearer. In addition to that, we talked about the reputational impact, which is covered under consumer-driven transparency. And while this may seem fairly burdensome, I'm very bullish on how generative AI can help ease the burden. So beyond the technical sort of solution that, maybe we shared some screenshots, which helps a lot. Here's how, we're seeing generative AI come into play here, right? And significantly help. So one, using generative AI, vendors can, your tier ones and tier twos, et cetera, can answer questions, your questionnaires, based on data that they might have provided to another client, or based on data that is already available from their website. So, one of the biggest points of friction is, vendors being overburdened by all these complex questionnaires. With generative AI, it's possible to pre-fill these questionnaires instantly, right? So super easy to do that. Number two, as these regulations come up, and as you optimize your processes and control frameworks around these regulations, there's a lot of digitization change required. And what generative AI is able to do is simply make it super easy to make those workflow and business process changes in your technology stack. So what generative AI is able to do is simply take your policy or modifications to your policy in plain English and instantly suggest changes to your controls workflow, right? It really feels like magic, but it's real now. And, at Certa, we're trying to lead the way on that. Thirdly, with just the sheer number of sort of hits that you get, right? Many of these turn out to be false positives. 80% turn out to be false positives. Again, AI has shown an incredible amount of accuracy. I've seen tests with 97+% accuracy, and getting better, every quarter. So the combination of AI plus human, I think, is the only way to deal with these mountain of alerts and adverse media, and all these that companies have to sift through as they get more and more transparency across multiple tiers of their supply chain, across owners of their supply chain, et cetera, right? There's some other ways, of course, insights is another one where you could simply ask questions of the data, instead of asking an analyst to create reports for you, et cetera. So I think generative AI is going to fundamentally change and improve things over here significantly, so that you as compliance professionals can focus more on setting the controls framework and not have to worry about or break your head about how those what's the technology implementation of your controls, So with that, really appreciate you sort of participating in this, I think, extremely important topic, important for not just the regulators and your customers and your board, but also for the world. So happy to take any questions.
Yeah, Jack, and before we move to the Q&A, actually, I want to go back really quick and circle back on some of the stuff you were talking about there with AI, because you and I, our company's partnered on a survey last year, and you and I spoke then. And one of the things that you said to me then has sort of resonated with me since then. So we were talking about AI implementation and compliance, and I think there is still a lot of hesitation among some compliance departments when it comes to AI. Of course, naturally, we're all risk averse.
Yeah.
But one of the things you said to me was that the AI, as powerful as it is and as much as it can do, it's not going to be as effective if your tech stack isn't set up for it to build
That's
off
right.
of it. And I think that that's a really interesting thing. And I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about that, because for those individuals who still might have that trepidation, there is stuff you can do at this time to make sure that when the time comes to dive into AI or whatever it is, you're ready to go. So can you talk a little bit about that, like that reinforcing of the tech stack?
Yeah, I think the AI will only be as powerful and as flexible as the foundational tech stack that you have, right? That the AI can sit on top of. So, what that, practically what that might mean for you is just to give you an example. If the AI suggests a particular control framework for, let's say the Norwegian supply chain law or the German supply chain law, but if your tech stack doesn't support that particular, is not flexible enough to support that control framework, then what are you going to do? The AI doesn't help, right? So the underlying technology needs to be powerful and flexible enough for the AI to come and help aid on top of it, right? So that's just one example. The similar thing applies to sort of form filling and questionnaires and everything, right? But just I think Kyle, you're I completely understand the client's hesitation on AI. And there are various things that clients can do to take baby steps in AI. So, some of the things that we see clients doing, of course, is one of the things is you want to make sure that you're using a good AI, like, an AI provider that's going to meet all the compliance, the privacy laws and data residency laws and all that, right? That's a given. But beyond that, clients, some clients are comfortable only sharing the schema, or sort of the business rules that they're using with AI, and no data at all. And some clients, go one step further and are comfortable sharing, some aspects of vendor data, but no client data. And then some other clients are, comfortable sharing some company data and vendor data, but no PII, like personally identifiable information data, right? So there are various, different steps that you can take to get comfortable with AI, to sort of go along the journey. I mean, one thing is clear, absolutely clear as day to me, that any company that doesn't use AI over the next 2 years is going to be left behind. This is the defining technology of our time is AI. For the first time, we basically, just to get like a little bit philosophical, but so far, the only thing that technology was able to do is like pull up data that was stored previously, right? So retrieve old data and of course analyze it, etc. For the first time, technology is able to create new data, new, like fresh data based on the context. It understands your context and specifically understands, your objectives, right? And context, and give you only the information that you're looking for, and generate that information from, all the data sources that are relevant. So it's a quantum leap in the way computation works, in the way technology works, and it is, it's like the move. It's going to be as impactful as the move from deployed software to SaaS software. Everybody does SaaS now, which is the benefits are so huge and so transformational that I would encourage everyone listening to start engaging in the Gen AI journey. And we're seeing multiple clients and leadership from multiple clients, create special budgets for Gen AI, have special, sort of recognition for teams that are advancing Gen AI, right? So I think many leaders are recognizing this as well.
Oh, thanks, Jack. So we'll go ahead and we'll move on to the audience Q&A portion of our webcast here. And we actually had several questions on our discussion of AI, so it'll be good to just kind of go right into those. So one question that was asked, is there currently an AI software being produced or available to companies now?
Yes. So, Certa is one of them. We provide many of the things that I mentioned in this. We have in market in various formats. So some of it is in sort of general availability. Some of it is in beta. So for folks who want to lean into AI, obviously you can reach out to us. But I think the other thing that I would encourage you to do is, even when you're selecting a technology provider, ask them about their AI roadmap. Because if they don't have a very clear, it needs to be beyond marketing speak, because everybody's trying to put some AI, right, in their marketing. So I think it's important to sift through how committed is the technology vendor that you're using to AI. And if they're not, reconsider. If they're not committed to AI, reconsider. Because those companies will be the ones that are left behind. They will be the blockbuster of our days.
Still that one blockbuster that's holding out in Alaska,
You don't want to be the client who's going to that blockbuster. You don't want to be the client that's going to, or you, anyway. I mean, for, some of it is cute, right? It's nostalgia. So I think that's going to be, non-AI tech companies, that's basically their future.
Thanks, Jay. We'll move on to the next question here. Can you discuss a little bit more about how generative AI can pre-fill questionnaires?
Yeah. So it's, questionnaires on Certa, basically, there are three ways by which those questionnaires are pre-filled. So one is vendors can upload like PDFs and Excel documents where they might have provided similar data to another client or in an RFP, et cetera, right? So you just upload those documents and the AI will sort of read that and try to pre-fill that information on behalf of the vendor. So that's one way. Second, the AI will automatically scan the website of the vendor and see if some information is just available, like it just in terms of their, their compliance standards, their privacy standards, their SOC 2 certifications, their insurance certifications, including, all the company locations and everything. So it's a combination of that public and private data that companies anyway use behind the scenes, right? This is what analysts do within vendors to basically complete this information. That analyst's job can be instantly done with AI now.
All right, thanks, Jag. We'll move on to our next question here. What should be the goals for organizations in 2024 regarding the prevention of modern slavery and forced labor?
Yeah, I think I just want one more thing. The previous question, it just came to me. I think, and this is not the topic of this discussion, but ESG regulations are becoming very top of mind for many of our clients, and some of the Scope 3 emissions data that companies need to gather is pretty burdensome for the company and also their vendors. So Scope 3 emissions are emissions from the supply chain, and again, that's where AI significantly helps to autocomplete parts of the data gathering process for the Scope 3 emissions. So I just want to just throw that there, just in case there are any, any members of the audience that are interested in ESG, right? ESG Scope 3 emissions. So what are the goals? I can talk about what some of our clients are aiming for, right? So the way clients are going about, the transparency goals is at a minimum a review of their process and their technology stack to see what is the gap between what they do today and what the regulations require you to do. And they're initially focused on the regulations where they have the most in the jurisdictions where they have the most number of employees or the most exposure, right? Naturally. And that gap analysis then leads to, a discussion around, with their management team saying, okay, this is serious. We need to meet this. So then a budget discussion, right? So once a budget is approved, then there's a market scan for, what's the ways by which, a combination of technology solutions and potentially, lawyers or consulting firms that can help us implement this. In at a minimum, that is I think needs to be the goal in 2024. And that is the goal for most of our clients in 2024. Some clients are more advanced than this. They did this last year. Very few clients did it the year before last. Last year, we saw a huge number of clients do this. This year is potentially the majority of the clients are, trying to implement these controls this year.
All right, thank you, Jag. We got time for a couple more minutes here for one more question. How can I be confident that I have the right kind of program to support compliance with all these regulations that we've talked about here today?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's going to be an ongoing journey. It's going to remain a journey of, you start with, your sort of biggest gap analysis and meeting your, trying to fill your biggest gaps in meeting those regulations. But then it's not going to end there, right? It's going to basically remain, through internal audits, external audits. You're going to have to keep modifying your program. So think of this program as an ongoing project. And then again, your technology provider as someone who can actually meet not only the needs of today, but is flexible enough to meet the needs of tomorrow as well. In terms of what is possible today to keep up, it would be your responsibility. So your responsibility with the help of potentially, consultants and clients to keep up with the regulations, again, starting with the regulations that, where you have the highest exposure, right? Where, they apply the most to you. In the future, this is at least 3 to 5 years out. I can totally see a world where AI will automatically suggest process improvements based on new regulations. So there's a new regulation or there's a modification to a regulation. The AI will read it, understand your process, and then say, okay, here are the gaps. We are moving towards it. It's inevitable that we're moving towards it. Whether it'll be 3 years out, 5 to 6 years out, I don't know. That's the future that we are working towards, Kyle. At Certa, that's our North Star, right? That this sort of to put this on autopilot for clients.
That was great. Thanks, Jag. So once again, to our audience, if you would like a copy of the slides that were just presented, you can download it from the drop-down menu on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. I'd like to thank our speaker again, Jag Lamba, and I'd like to give a special thanks to Certa for making this webcast possible. To obtain your CPE credit, please disable your pop-up blockers to access the exam. The webcast will close automatically and the final exam will be presented in a separate window. If you have trouble viewing the CPE test or receiving the CPE certificate, please send an email to webcasts@complianceweek.com. This webcast has been recorded and will be available later today to Compliance Week members on our website under the webcast tab, which also contains a library of additional CPE webcasts. If you would like to learn more about becoming a member, please contact us at info@complianceweek.com. For today only, we invite you to use the code WEBCAST365 to receive a membership for just $1 a day. Check out complianceweek.com/membership to learn more. This concludes our webcast. Thank you again for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jack.